Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having us here and giving possibility to present our Rabati material. So we'll have two presentations. I'll make the first presentation, and second presentation will be given by Dr. Claudia Sagona. So in this discussion, we'll present results of archaeological excavations from Rabati in southwest Georgia. So I'll just remind you that Gaia, our project, is a collaboration involving archaeologists from the University of Melbourne and the Georgian National Museum. So the excavation in Rabati, southwest Georgia, are a good fit with the issue covered in this workshop, as they are essential to the Gaia project aims, and those aims are. Those aims are as follows: accumulating as many radiometric dates as possible to underpin the cultural sequence represented at the site. We have grappled with the problematic terminology problems affecting regional. So those topics are as follows: accumulating as many radiometric data as possible to underpin the cultural sequence represented at the site. We have grappled with the problematic terminology problems affecting regional periodizations, hampering comparisons between T14 supported sequences. We have identified cultural aspects that reflect a transition between the Kuraks and early Kurgan or Middle Bronze Age. This aspect will be the subject of the second part of our presentation. Although it is early days of the Rabati excavation, we cannot contribute directly to the chronological definition of the different stages of the Middle Bronze Age and Mid Bronze Age, Late Bronze Age transition. There is evidence of both periods at Rabati. And finally, the same can be said of the chronospatial issues between the different Late Bronze, Early Iron Age cultures. Similarly, there is evidence of both periods in Rabati. So I'll just before I go through all these five topics, let me briefly describe Rabati site. Just to remind you, Rabati is a fortified artificial mound situated in Zveli village on the northern edge of the Aerobatic mountain, overlooking the Kura Valley at an altitude of 1,480 meters above the sea level. The closest main towns are Archaeological to the west and Aspinza to the east. Rabati was first investigated by the Georgian archaeology in 1970s. Three Gaia excavation seasons were held in 2016, 18, and 19, and COVID restrictions permitting, we hope to be back in the field in 2022. Three areas have been targeted so far to determine the stratigraphic depth and chronological potential of the site. The focus of this presentation probably will fall on trenches A and B 10, 11, and D 9, which is arrowed in the slide. Our long-term plan is to have extensive horizontal exposure over the site to capture the settlement plans. This activity is becoming increasingly important because of the substantial early Kurgan-Bedeni phase deposits close to the surface. Along the northern edge of the site, there is a substantial fortification wall, which probably once encircled the summit. In this slide, you can see the surviving fortification walls with the rounded tower on the left. So now let's go back to our five topics. So today, the Gaia project has generated 20 dates from Robarti settlement, a terrace Kurak settlement about 2.5 kilometers west of Rabati, as well as other from upper area where there are medieval and Iron Age deposits. And from Rabati, we have almost the same number of absolute dates from medieval, Bedeni, and Kuraks contexts. It goes without saying that at Rabati, the radiocarbon dates targeted only areas with clear habitation levels uncovered at this site, and generally from contexts linked to a cultural features. This slide gives the possibility, gives the possible and non-culture periods represented at the site. We have a few tenuous indicators of possible Neolithic presence. The top shed can be compared to examples from Aruklo in the Kura project. We are quite certain that Chalcolithic remains are presented as some pottery fragments mirror Chalcolithic pottery at Ortosani near the Georgian-Turkish border, southwest of Akhaltsikhe, that was presented by Irina Rambashidze yesterday. Unmistakably, Bedeni levels are now firmly fixed through absolute dating. There are pockets of Iron Age pottery that is similar to that found in Eastern Turkey in the Sasayuk excavation and in the Bayburt and Pasilner surveys. Similar finds also came from the Apa citadel area in nearby Robarti. And finally, we have excavated architecture and cultural remains from the medieval period in the far west of the site, Rabati. There are the radiocarbon dates so far generated from samples in Rabati. They were obtained from charcoal samples, which were twigs and small branches, which effectively minimized the old wood effect. 20 radiocarbon samples from the central and western areas at Rabati were analyzed into laboratories in Waikato Radiocarbon Lab in New Zealand and in Poznan Radiocarbon Lab in Poland. 3 Kurak samples were taken from the floor and associated areas. The details can be found in our radiocarbon articles, as indicated in the top left corner. The Bedeni dates from both D9 and AB 10-11 sectors form a satisfyingly consistent range conforming to the chronological span noted at other sites in the Caucasus. At Rabati, they span from 2460 to 1864 BC. Totally unexpected was the substantial non-domestic Kuraks architecture at Rabati. Here you can see a large stone building with corridors. We have reached a floor level in the corridor, and pottery is unmistakably Kuraks. Bedeni period deposits, however, were encountered just under the modern surface and over the Kuraks architecture. Some spots had been disturbed by medieval activity, such as the round stone line feature, which had cut into the lower walls. There is no evidence of Bedeni activity inside of the Kurak structure. It would seem that when Bedeni community settled there, the building had been abandoned. No typical Kurak domestic dwellings have been found, although 2.5 kilometers away at Robarti area of Kurak's house has been excavated. Significantly, at Rabati, there are substantial deposits from the early Kurgan period over early Bronze Kuraks levels. Robarti is comprised of series of typical Kuraks houses with their complements of internal fitments arranged east-west. Some Kuraks burials were also dug into or near the settlement houses. The aerial view of House 6 on the left of the slide clearly displays the typical layout of a Kurak's home. As it is terrace site on a steep slope, the front of the structure had eroded, but the rear wall was preserved to a height of over 2 meters, and typical Kurak's pottery and artifacts were left in situ. In House 6, the pottery reflects the classical red-black coloring of the established Kurak's culture. One example of relief's spiral decoration from a large art from this context, the first identified among the Robarti settlement finds. This spiral design was used for our Gaia logo. In other dwellings at the sites, wares tend to be monochrome gray-brown with some characteristic recalling earlier traditions of chaff-faced fabrics. The Kuraks burials, presumably after they fell from disuse, held occupation phases, held pottery that also reflected the later trend of red-black surfaces. And House 4 on the right had two occupation phases. Phase 1. It is dated to 3,300 to 3,300, 3,200 BC, and second phase 3,200 to 2,900. However, continuous occupation of this site was likely. Rabati's Kurak's presence spanned from 3039 to 2630 BC. There is an overlap with Robarti's second phase, 3,200 to 2,900 in House 4, and with House 6, which dates to, again 3,240 to 920 BC. Hence, at this stage, the settlement at Robarti has early habitation deposits, but this might change as we progress with the Rabati excavations. The presence of Chalcolithic pottery at the Rabati indicates occupation well before Robarti. Architecture on a grand scale dated to the late Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age, and within Kurak's context has been known for some time, such as those illustrated here from Berik Debi, modeled on a sacred structures in Mesopotamia. Gone Shahar, a fortified settlement, and Sosoyuk's possible defensive wall. This map indicates a site with substantial architecture marked by red dots at Kone Shahar in Chaldran, Iran, and Mohlablur, Shenkavit, and Adablur in Armenia. Not shown are Yanik Tepe in Iran and Delber Yera in Levant. In answer to one of the conferences line of inquiry, we have presented here the range of 14 dates for the Bedeni period and other sitting in the Kuraks and early Kurgan range. As many of you know, Tony Sagona made every effort to generate more 14 dates from past excavation, and this appears in this publication and in his publication, and we aim to continue this trend in our fieldwork. The cultural horizon, Martopi and Bedeni, are fraught with problems of nomenclature. Ceramics of the so-called early Trialetine and late Kuraks horizons look confusingly similar to Martopi. In many respects, it would be accurate to state that this aspect of field has yet be reached maturity. Where do we stand? Where do we draw a line between cultures, and does the evidence warrant such a clear-cut divisions? As Tony Sagona wrote of the early Kurgan period, as for the final stages of the early Bronze Age, considerable confusion still surrounds the term late Kuraks, early Trialeti, and Martopi. Some questions remain, such as, for instance, what attributes exactly define Martopi ceramics and how they differ from early Trialeti. The problem of overlapping cultural traditions is directly connected to the nomenclature of periodization of these cultures. In 1941, Boris Kulkin first distinguished two groups among the kurgans that he excavated in Trialeti, which he assigned to the early and middle Bronze Ages. So social cultural changes and the emergence of kurgan cultures make it logical to attribute early kurgans together with the subsequent Trialeti cultural kurgans to the Middle Bronze Age. The Kuraks evidence has long been considered to fall within the early Bronze Age. If in the closing years of the Kuraks, a way of life and the emergence of Bedeni tradition has an element of coexisted for a certain period of time, as has been considered for some sites in the period, then staunchly adhering to the two epochs term of early Bronze and Middle Bronze Age is inappropriate and has contributed to a confusing lack of clarity. The division has led to rigid divisions and interpretation of some cultural process at play. As we will discuss, they are a sign of enduring population, which stemmed from the Kuraks culture tradition, even though around 2500 BC communities in the Kuraks and beyond were undergoing marked cultural transitions. For this reason, and like other scholars have adopted previously, we prefer to use the early Kurgan term in order to distinguish the culture spanning the late early Bronze Age Kuraks, Martopi and Bedeni from the later. Somewhat better defined Trialeti Kurgan culture. A good example of this structure can be found in the book published by the Center of Archaeological Studies in Georgia concerning the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age of Georgia. It includes the early Kurgan culture period within phase 4 of the early Bronze Age, that is to a transitional period spanning into the Mid Bronze Age. Okay. The sequence now let's go back to the Rabati excavation. The sequence in trench A and B 1011 is quite clear. We have at the lowest level reach so far flow levels associated with the substantial Kuraks architecture. Reasonably thick deposits from the subsequent early Kurgan period and dated to the Bedeni phase consisted predominantly of plaster habitation surfaces. That was over Kuraks architecture. This was kept by traces of medieval occupation that seems to be short-lived with the use of existing architecture as a shelter rather than permanent habitation. A horseshoe-shaped hearth impressed with irregular circles and other small finds such as smoking pipes, glass fragments, and so on belong to this time. I think the Bedeni deposit, including many pottery fragments, were uncovered in trench D10 and D9. There is the aerial view of the trench as it was in 2019. D9.2 proved to be largely free of later disturbances to the Bedeni plaster habitation surface and pits. We will return to this sector later, as the finds here reflect on economic strategies of the Bedeni period, namely a clear textile industry that may have had a commercial aspect. Today, the D9.4 trench has the deposit stratigraphical section, the deepest stratigraphical section because of the Soviet era excavation and some more recent disturbances. In 2016 and 2018, this trench was cleaned and slightly enlarged to the north to the old and narrow trench, with set directly on top of a pit, is still visible in the section. Only half of circular clay structure labeled locus 550 survived as it was disturbed by modern activities. The effort in reading dated the deposit to 2342 to 2018 BC, which suggests that this feature belongs to the Bedeni period, but it seems to be contemporary with Kuraks remains because it's almost at the same level in this trench. Apart from plastered habitation layers, there were also fragments of fine installation built of clay, and there were pits as well. In the eastern half of the northern section, a medieval pit was cut through a fairly uncomplicated series of deposition as shown in this 2018 drawing of the section. The Kurak deposit appears to be at a depth of 2.5 meters from the modern surface, and it is separated from the Bedeni level by a distinct burnt reddish yellow sandy clay layer marked as a locus 523 in the slide. Looking at this section, the undetermined wall marked in the photo must belong to either the Bedeni phase, the Kuraks, or the earlier established Kuraks period. Any of these options pose interesting and unexpected possibilities. Here's another view of the undetermined wall. And finally, I would like to briefly touch on the Rabati textile industry, for which we have compelling evidence. We already know that in Kurak's period, textile experimentation had created specialized textile techniques that we now take from granted. Notably, two-needle knitting and less commonly used cross-knit looping made with a robust-eyed needle. Cross-knit looping has a considerable age, with examples dating back to the 9th millennium BC. But these were groundbreaking advances in textile technology, as significant as those made in metallurgy. In Robarti, MPP analysis has identified hemp and flax fibers, and one of the knitting impressions pictured on top center top also came from there. Oh, sorry. Here's all these tools. Area D9 appears to have been an open air zone, and here 146 bone tools and 11 cylindrical loom weights indicate clear textile production, both spinning and weaving, and possibly the dyeing of clothes. The loom weights pictured here are of type of generally associated with upright looms. Non-pollen polymorph analysis carried out on soil samples and on the textile tools by Inga Martopishvili at the it was analyzed by Inga Martopishvili from the Georgian National Museum, and so she identified flax, hemp, and cotton. Wool was rare; only one fiber was presented, and this had no twist, which might indicate it had been proceeded into yarn. Dyed fibers included yellow, or pink, blue, and purple. Some fibers were blend of hemp and flax, indicating experimentation by the textile manufacturers. Notably, among the textile fibers documented in the Rabati settlement is cotton. Unlike flax and hemp, cotton has not been observed previously in Bedeni contexts. The earliest evidence of this fiber in the South Caucasus is known only from the late Bronze Age Sapar-Haraba kurgans, dated to the 5th, 14th century BC. In the North Caucasus, however, the evidence for cotton-like fibers is documented as early as 4th millennium BC in the Novosvobodnaya kurgan. Local cultivation of cotton in the Rabati region should be discounted due to the environmental conditions that were not suited to its cultivation. Hence, the presence of cotton as an imported material could reflect on aspects of long-distance trade, prestige items, social display, and so on. You can see in this slide in this slide the distribution of the large number of textile tools across the D9 trench. Aside from the sheer number of bone tools collected in D9, we found a few possible scale pen weights in the same context, which might indicate commercial as opposed to household textile production. But we need more information to make any firm conclusions about the scale of manufacturing. It is likely that flax was grown locally, as food crops were also evident in the Bedeni context, as determined by Catherine Longford. It seems clear that the community living there was permanent, tied to agriculture as part of the economic strategies. This doesn't discount the possibility that some groups in the region or even within the Rabati communities were more mobile. So now let's touch our final fifth and fourth and fifth topics. Late Bronze and early Iron Age witnesses so-called coexistence of the Colchian and Samcharo cultures. The former from the western and the later from the central part of the southern Caucasus. Our knowledge of the archaeology of the Sanskrit Javakheti is otherwise mostly based on the investigation of graves, such as the Middle Bronze Age barrows field in Bertagana, or the Middle Bronze Age and Late Bronze Age barrows in Samarkand Anebi, located 500 meters west of Rabati and in adjacent areas. Relying only on funerary context, our understanding of the material culture of the Meskhet Javakheti region is skewed because of the depth of systematically excavating multi-period settlements. Our knowledge of absolute chronology, settlement patterns, pottery production, and social and economic structure in this region is lacking. Evidence of the two-way of processing of population of movements through this corridor was found in the second millennium BC barrow discovered in Zveli village, where Rabati is located. Based on the funeral rites and artifacts in these barrels, they are considered to have Aegean and Central Anatolian influences. Significantly, the latter are believed to have played a role in the formation of subsequent Late Bronze Age cultures further into the territory of Eastern Georgia. The appearance of Colchian elements during the Late Bronze, Early Iron Age in the Meskheti region is common. Indeed, during this time, this region is considered to be under the Colchian sphere of influence. In addition, a few kilometers from the village of Zveli, a mold of a Colchian type X was found. Considering this connection and the triality fragments found at Rabati, it seems like that Rabati was occupied during the Mid-Bronze 2 and 3 phases, according with triality phase 2 and 3, or the ancient Colchian period A. A second fragment has pale brownish pink and matte slipped exterior surface, has been carefully decorated with a combed half-circle pattern. The interior is plain and the gritty nature of the clay is visible at the surface. Although it looks like a Colchian type decoration, the surface treatment is not like the burnished finish as we know from Colchis. A fragment from a large vessel described as butter chunk with a horizontal handle and adjacent diagonal hole finds a very similar shape parallel in a sherd from Udabno, which is dated to the late Bronze Age. A Rabati red slip fragments of a similar type came from high-shouldered bowls and narrow-necked jars with mottled red slipped surfaces. The context of these fragments all have some degree of mixing with a range of wares present. Whether the type of red slipped ware belongs in the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age remains to be determined. Such vessels with basket handles and side holes occur in many contexts. At Yanik Tepe in Iran, a tall, narrow type was found in Trench K, Pit A, dated to late Iron Age. It must be noted that butter chunks with horizontal handles with a hole to the side have also been attributed to the medieval period, for instance, at Manisi, but the Rabati types thus differ in being a tall form with incised intersecting wavy line decoration. A small quantity of Iron Age wares have been recovered during the both season of excavation from various trenches. Although clear Iron Age contexts are elusive, the nature of this material tends to fall into variation of black and red slipped wares. Similar to the range of fabrics seen at Sasayuk, Rabati reflects a pattern of popular and distinct shapes being manufactured out of various fabrics, which is a pattern also apparent in the other neighborhood region with Iron Age sites, namely high-shouldered bowl or jar fragment with outturned, sharply defined rims, whole mouth rims, rilled or ridged walls, and flasks or bottle shapes. Surfaces can be burnished or made. Decoration is also distinctive among Iron Age wares, including incised, hatched or herringbone designs and other variations of simple linear patterns. Including the upper area of Robarti on the crest of the peak, there where there are substantial remains of medieval architecture and remains of a fortification wall. Some pottery fragments were found that hint at an earlier Iron Age present, but this site has not been further excavated since this part of the Robarti area hasn't been excavated since 2016. I can see this area. And yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, first off, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about the finds at Rabati. I just want to mention that I will be covering similar grounds to what I have spoken about in previous lectures, as mentioned by Anna Paula before. So some of you are going to think you've heard some of it before. But also I want to let you know that I'm here in Melbourne, Australia, so I'm at a disadvantage because unfortunately I couldn't stay awake for yesterday's your afternoon session because it would put me well and truly in the early hours of the morning. So I've missed some of what you've already talked about, but I was quite interested to hear the previous speakers and the comments at the end, because I think I'm going to cover similar ground in terms of this, to me, what seems to be an overlap or sort of a continuation into the Bedeni period. So the detailed analysis of the material culture so far excavated at Rabati has documented an array of Bedeni common wares as well as a small number of classic black burnished finer Bedeni vessels. As already discussed, the radiocarbon dates have confirmed the date of the relevant deposits. In addition to looking at the Bedeni phase evidence from Rabati, we want to also offer some thoughts about the transitional phases as set out in the conference. Quote, the characterisation of transitional phases and assemblages needs an open confrontation between scholars working in different areas in order to reach an agreed solution. There are, in fact, several cases in which constantly growing corpus of available radiometric data suggests absolute dates significantly different from those traditionally assumed for specific culture and challenge their very attribution to a wider chronocultural phase, end quote. These notions have been uppermost in our line of research concerning Rabati and related archaeological evidence for the end of the Kuraxes period and for the phases which followed. These are aspects on which this presentation will focus. Just to recap some aspects of the cultural sequence of Rabati, as you've heard, we have got possibly some Neolithic that's somewhat similar to Aruklo, plus other sherds. We thought we had clear Sioni ware with these cut rims that you can see here. They fooled me for a few years until we came to the 2019 excavation. So we also have, as you can see, the Bedeni fine wares, coarse wares, and Giorgi's already spoken briefly about the late Bronze and Iron Age. I won't be talking about those, and also medieval material as well. I'll be focusing on the the Bedeni period and the late Kurax. Of the early Bronze Age finds from the site, we have typical Kurax forms, both impressed and relief linear decoration, signs of controlled firing producing classic red-black hues, and shapes such as handles and tall neck jars shown in the lower part of the slide here. There are indications from the finds that we may be able to chart the evolution of cultural trends through the transitional early Bronze to the early Kurgan period, especially for pottery forms. For example, this squat pot, which is a late early Bronze Age form, I believe. Only a few pottery fragments hint at a transitional types and possibly Martkopi fragments. Unequivocal now is the characterisation of the Bedeni pottery range. A small amount of sorry, when I'm talking, can you see all the gallery at the side there or just my screen?
No, we see it.
Oh, okay, I'll try and get rid of it. Is that better? No.
Oh, it's fine, it seems to me.
Okay? Okay.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a small amount of fine wares that came from the D9 trench. This includes better finished, black burnished, distinctive Bedeni tankards with knee-bend handles. A detailed report of the ceramic finds has been published in 2019. All the finds from Rabati are being given equal attention in our investigations and reports. While it may be too early to speak of the true function of certain areas of the site, Area D9 had wares associated with foodways, cooking and dining. The range of cooking ware shapes is limited, falling within our category of common ware. They are found in deposits often rich in organic material which coats and stains the pottery. Typical shapes include baggy, deep and open forms, often with loop handles or cut and folded rims to neaten the lip, such as the two on the right here, and there are the handles like this. There are also some rims with that are flaring. And this is a rare pot in the common ware, like a mug shape. We would like to turn to some aspects of our research stemming from these finds. It seems to us that even though Rabati might have a break between the Kurax and the Bedeni phases, We can still detect signs of cultural continuity in the finds. Not unexpectedly, people like to continue long-held traditions and belief systems as they travelled around the region within what is likely to have been their transitional lands. Such a notion is not new. Elena Rova and Zurab Makaradze, for instance, have previously argued for long-term continuity from early Bronze to late Bronze Age in regard to the use of burial grounds at Okarakevi, described as, quote, the seat of ritual activities by the local populations, end quote. We've discussed the significance of the trays elsewhere. Their presence in the Chalcolithic context in the Caucasus has been well charted, such as the two on the examples on the left here. They were also found in early Bronze Age contexts at Soshuyuk, and now they are represented in the early Kurgan period in contexts in Rabati, such as this example on the right-hand side. This represents a millennium and a half of use, which spanned 3 cultural phases of this particular specialised pottery form. Indeed, the example from Robarti is extremely large, measuring 70 centimetres across. This example has familiar qualities enduring through the centuries: extremely thin base, rough resting surface, shallow side walls, inward curving back wall, a distinctly scooped front, and poorly finished exterior with better finished interior. And here are some examples from Soshuyuk that retain Chalcolithic traits, but they are from the late early Bronze Age context. Hards and andirons are another enduring form. They are the hallmark of Kurax's culture through to the Bedeni phase, but with some evolution in shape and decoration. From Bedeni context at Rabati came a triangular hearth prop on the top right, similar in form to those modelled into the in-ground hearths from the Kurax's house at Soshuyuk in the bottom right of the photo. Decoration of ram's horns is known in early Bronze Age contexts from Karnut in Armenia and from a survey find around Soshuyuk pictured in the middle. Note the punctured eyes on the opposite side of the Rabati example in the top right. This amazing twin anthropomorphic object is probably connected to a hearth or fire installation. In this case, obsidian fragments have been inserted into the clay, representing eyes. It was found in the 1970s excavation in Rabati, but in an area that can now be firmly associated with Bedeni contexts. It is akin to a fixture on a fire installation found at Berekal-Debi, pictured here on the lower left. Berekal-Debi lies 62 kilometres northeast of Rabati. For comparison, here is a fire installation from Berekal-Debi again and from Rabati pictured together. They're quite similar, I think. Another enigmatic form is illustrated here. Some unusual fragments were first noted in the 2018 season, seemingly shaped like a capital B on its side. It was not obvious how and to what kind of vessel these were joined. At first, it was thought that they might be a variant of the double-looped handles on the Natsagora jars, pictured in the lower centre. Decoration is limited to wavy and straight ridges and small knobs applied to the back of handles. So you can see here the wavy line running along the outer edge, and here is a ridge running down the back of the other example. With the discovery of a more complete vessel in 2019, it became clear that they were horizontal, double, and sometimes triple-looped bridge-like handles, supported by small internal pillars of clay. This intriguing vessel form was embellished on the handle top with 3 knobs near the bowl and 2 on its outer end. The bowl had repeated cuts or notches around the rim in the style more typical of Chalcolithic Sioni vessels. Until it was confirmed by absolute dates, there was the possibility that the cut rim fragments of this nature, which had been appearing in the pottery bags, were possibly of Chalcolithic date. But this vessel is made from Bedeni commonware, and it came from clear, confirmed Bedeni contexts. An approximate parallel is the unusual object from Berekal-Debi, shown in the upper left. 3 points of similarity link the two vessels. First, the overall open and bowl-like shape. Second, the 5 knobs applied to the rim on the Berkel-Debi example, and 5 knobs are distributed over the top of the bridge handle on the Rabati example. And third, the odd horizontal stance of the handle on both. The Berkel-Debi handle, especially the tight, bent outer end out here, suggests that the objects were stored hanging up. Could this be how the Rabati example was stored in and displayed in early Kurgan dwellings? Giorgi alerted us to another example in the Ahal-Seke Museum, which is not far from Rabati, which also came from Rabati, the site, during the earlier Georgian fieldwork there, and it's pictured here. If we accept the possibility that the Kuraxes folk persisted but transformed themselves and evolved, then another possible pottery link might be between the unusual bridged-handled vessels and the Kuraxes pottery scoop form shown in the upper left corner. There are 2 ways of looking at the link: the shape and the as-yet unknown function. Of the shape, both forms are similar with open, shallow bowls, an unusual handle position. Both handles are fitted to the side, and unlike the usual attachment of Kuraxes handles to other pots, the scoop handle is pushed in and recessed into the bowl. For me, the linchpin between the types came from Imris Rakar, which Giorgi excavated recently. He found a fascinating hybrid form in a pit dated to the Bedeni phase, and we are very grateful for his permission to show the example here in the bottom left of the slide. The strongest link between the Kurax and the later Bedeni period is the large jars with face designs from Ananuri Kurgans 1 and 3 and from the Bedani settlement. We're addressing these issues of cultural continuity, adaptation and evolution in forthcoming publications, but we thought it might be worth floating this possibility in this forum. If we factor in the genetic studies of ancient communities in the region, which suggest a fairly constant genetic fingerprint for the population in the Caucasus from the early Bronze Age to the Iron Age, then trying to identify what happened to the early Kurax people becomes a pressing and important issue. In closing, I would like to briefly return to the evidence of Soshuyuk in eastern Turkey. When the radiocarbon dates began to accumulate for the site, we realised that pottery, which looked remarkably like Kuraxes ware, were present in the houses that dated from the closing years of the early Bronze Age and well into the Middle Bronze Ages. The well-preserved structure was uncovered in Trench L16, dated to the Middle Bronze Age 1, equating to Sos period 4A, pictured here. This 2-roomed rectilinear dwelling had in-ground hearths and a bench along one wall in each room. The house was built on a foundation of river-worn cobbles. In many respects, it appears as a development from the classic domestic architecture of the Kuraxes period. Over the Middle Bronze Age 1 house was an impressive building of the Middle Bronze Age 2, comprised of 3 main rooms and a 4th semi-subterranean storage area in the northwest corner of the middle room, just here. Fitments within the room and their contents still have Kuraxes characteristics. Hearths, one quite elaborate with the triangular props that we've seen before, which represents the peak development of the style, mud brick walls, a rich array of bone tools, fine obsidian points, and developed pottery forms. All these manufacturers indicate thriving industries. Although the structures and the plans of the residents are not completely typical of Kuraxes' cultural tradition, their internal features fit comfortably within it. If use of private space can be defined by the nature of the fitments and layout of the rooms, then the traits of the Kuraxes' domestic life would seem to have carried over into the later phases. Part of the significance of the house sequence is the continuity of the habitation of the site. At Sos, we observe that pottery evolved from the Kuraxes tradition, surviving into the Middle Bronze Age or early Kurgan period, but it had a distinctive white gritty quality. We mention these finds here first in order to summarise the background for the notion of longevity of the Kuraxis tradition beyond 2500 BC, as first detected through the evidence of Sos. And second, and probably the most important aspect to consider, is the wider implications for such long-lived cultural traditions within the archaeological scheme proposed by scholars. Such evidence hovers uncomfortably over the sharp divisions between cultures that we often like to devise. This evidence emphasises just how important absolute dating is for this period at every site investigated. But I'm sure that, in this forum, we are talking to the already converted. In essence, when dealing with the archaeological context dating from around 2500 BC and after, absolute dates will be pivotal in defining where a given site sits within the early Kurgan scheme. So, in summary, we have not just like gritty wares from Sos Huyuk pointing to enduring cultural traits, but lingering signs of other manufactures, such as trays, hearths, andines, open bowls, and distinctive face designs, and, as Eleonora and Zurab Makaradze suggested, in ritual practice, belief systems, and connection to ancestral lands. At the end of the early Bronze Age period, it would seem that the Kurax culture faded out of the region and lost its distinctive characteristics in a patchy way around 2500 BC. It did not suddenly disappear. How we interpret these trends will not lie in the broad brushstrokes of archaeological narratives, but in close studies of regional pockets and site-by-site evidence. Despite shifting and evolving cultural trends, it seems that a stable population inhabited the region who held on to core traditions. Recognition of such a scenario could truly throw light on long theorised cultural issues like ancestral connection to territories, familial or individual land ownership, ethnicity and identity, the nature of conservative household practices, and so on. If we return to the conference theme concerning cultural transitions and joining my voice with what I heard before, I personally have to admit that I puzzle over the whole category of Maatkopi as a cultural identity and over the nature of its characteristics. For me, I would be happy with sharper resolution of its spatial and temporal extent. I also feel uneasy about the chronological parameters of the so-called early Trialeti. I hope that we will be able to resume work in Rabati soon. We will find evidence of these transitional phases. I thank you. And I leave you with just some of the publications that are in the pipeline, and I'll alert everybody as soon as they're accepted into the journals that they're being reviewed by, and some are in press already. Thank you.